Hello, it's story time from Japanese history, and in this session we're going to talk about smallpox and the Daibutsu. So we're going all the way back to the Nara period, and this is a period of history that's not talked about as much, doesn't show up nearly so often in anime or manga, which is kind of sad because it's really interesting. But we're going to talk about a smallpox epidemic that swept Japan. And we're beginning in August of 735. So this is when it was first recorded in the records of the time. And traditionally it's said that it was brought by a fisherman who had been on the mainland and brought it back with him. Hard to say. But what we do know is by 736, the epidemic was in full force. And people were dying, people were fleeing, farmers were abandoning crops in their fields, food shortages were occurring because of the deaths and the flight from the land. And by 737, there was a tax exemption across the entire country. So I want you to imagine how bad it has to be that the government just says, fine, no taxes. But of course, smallpox is really bad, and I'm going to show some potentially disturbing images, but a lot of people don't understand how awful a disease smallpox was. And it's, this is why we have vaccines. It was estimated to kill about 500 million people just in the 20th century. And if you remember, the 20th century is when we beat it. Okay, the last naturally occurring case was 1977, and so it killed 500 million people up until that point, just in the 20th century. So smallpox swept across Japan. It's just absolutely devastated the country. All levels of society were affected. So actually politics shifted because opportunities opened up in court because officials were dying. Roughly a third of the adult population was killed. And smallpox tends to be harder on young children, so we can safely assume that a much higher percentage of kids were dying with this. And the other thing to consider is that's a third who died. The survivors are not unaffected, right? So not only are they left with tremendous scarring, sometimes smallpox will leave you blind as well. So that's also going to put a real dent in your economy and your labor. So about this time, we start seeing references to Hoshoshin and our smallpox demon, smallpox yokai. And as in the West, red becomes associated with the smallpox and can be sometimes used as a treatment. So you will see people being dressed in red clothing or exposed to red objects, not just here in Japan, but in Europe for treating smallpox as well. So smallpox just rages through the country and absolutely devastates the country. And it's going to take a long time to recover, as you can imagine, from losing a third of your population and an additional percentage of your remaining labor force. So because of this and some political instability, again, at the time, the emperor wants to do something about this. So Emperor Shomu issues an edict to build temples all throughout the nation. And in particular, we're going to build at Tōdai-ji, which had just been recently founded, and we are going to commission a Daibutsu, a giant Buddha, to put here. So the Daibutsu is commissioned in 743. It does not open with the eye-opening ceremony until 752, because it is a phenomenal construction project. And we need to talk about the scale of this thing. Until 1998, this was the world's largest building. That is a huge stretch to hold the record. But still, we need to talk about scale, okay? More than 2.5 million people worked on this project, okay? About 350,000 of them directly in construction and the others in supporting. So providing wood, providing rice to the construction workers in a variety of ways, just contributing to this effort. Just hundreds of thousands, literally millions of people working on this. The Daibutsu itself is 52 feet tall. It's bronze made from 8 separate castings, but it is not even the biggest and most impressive part of this project. On either side of the temple itself, there are 2 pagodas, and these pagodas are over 300 feet tall And again, remember, we're talking in the 700s. These are some of the largest structures on the planet at that time. For this initial construction, they cleared well over 2,000 acres of forest to get the lumber for this. To cast Buddha, they used all of the available copper in Japan. All of it. Just all of it. It took 163,000 cubic feet of charcoal to do the casting. So again, absolute deforestation. This project essentially bankrupted the nation. It took decades to recover from this. It deforested much of the area, again, decades to recover. The scale of this project was enormous. And what you need to understand is when you go to Tōdai-ji today and you see how big it is, it was bigger than that. This is a reconstruction after fire and earthquake damage, and it is a full third smaller than the original. One of those periods of reconstruction happened after the Genpei War, which we've talked about with Danura and the archery challenge. And it was burned, the Toudaiji was burned during the war. And so they rebuilt it, and they had to clear entire forests looking for trees that could be the replacement pillars. And even then, because they had cleared so much forest the first time, and even hundreds of years later, it hadn't fully recovered, they couldn't actually replace the original pillars, and they bound together several smaller trees to replace the pillars. They built 118 dams to raise the rivers to transport the pillars for this reconstruction project. Wood was sourced from 10 provinces. Again, the scale of this project is phenomenal, but it is so beautiful to look at. Now the non-daimon, the South Great Gate, is where you'll enter Tōdai-ji, and it has 2 guardians on the side, as is traditional for these gates. And what's amazing is these wooden figures are original to the 1100s. Now this is what they look like today. They're protected, but I did find some photos during the restoration work, so you can see them without the screening in front of them. And I talked about aspects being a reconstruction, but it wasn't everything that was reconstructed. Some parts are original, and this particular lotus petal with the image on it is original to the 7th century. So when Tōdai-ji was completed, it was hugely significant in contemporary Buddhism. All 6 schools, at the time there were 6 schools of Buddhism in Japan, all 6 were represented at Tōdai-ji. All officially licensed monks who took ordination at the Vinaya also they did that at Tōdai-ji. And Tōdai-ji held its authority until the capital moved away from Nara, and that's when it started to decline a little bit, and the Vinaya lineage died out, and it became less significant overall in Buddhism. However, it is of course still a hugely significant site, and it is of course a hugely impressive site still to this day. And even with the size and the scale that it is, being a third reduced from its original, it's still a very impressive thing to see. So that is how smallpox influenced one of the most phenomenal building projects in Japanese history, or indeed in world history, and I hope you enjoyed learning about it. Thanks for joining me for Storytime from Japanese History.